not going to go too much into this model. You can read about it a little bit in the book. But if we have interest rates, if we have a dynamic model that has our impatience to have more profits now, we would have a model that ends up where the marginal growth equals grows at the rate of interest. So in the exhaustible resource, the price went up by the rate of interest. In the renewable resources, we have this growth curve is increasing at the rate of interest. So it's below the maximum sustainable yield because we want to move some of our profit. We want to catch a little bit more now. And then the fishery is out there, and it's growing at a rate that corresponds to the rate that money grows in the bank. There's opportunity cost. There's other investments that we can make. We're going to have the growth rate in our fishery correspond to the growth rate of other investments we could be making. So what are some successful fisheries for us to think about? So the Dungeness crab fishery in the San Francisco Bay is a sustainable fishery right now. It goes back and forth each year. They have a hard time measuring it. They have a hard time modeling it into the future. But the number of people that are allowed to fish has been limited, and their effort has been limited, and they have a handle on the biology. So there is basically like the Dungeness crab aren't crashing. They go up and down every year. The amount that's landed, the amount that they measure out there, moves around. But they, have got to a sustainable place. Maine lobster and Canadian lobster appear to be sustainable fisheries as well. There's a lot of lobster right now. So the amount of lobster that they're landing, instead of crashing, it's actually going up. They're not really exactly sure why it's going up. But overall, it's sustainably managed. Their government manages, what size individuals you can grow, what size traps you can put out there, who can be in the fishery. So they've done a whole bunch of iterating over time to manage how many people are in the fishery. In Alaska, we have some of the salmon fisheries are healthy, and some of the salmon fisheries are overfished. But there's some where it's, they're more remote, or it's well managed, or there's something very resilient about the natural reproductive rate of the fishery. Like it's remote enough that it's not affected by civilization, so the rate to reproduce and increase its stock back to sustainable levels is strong. And then we have these transfer quotas being introduced in many areas. So we have a whole bunch of new policy, new fisheries policy, new economic policy where these quotas are being introduced, including in Alaska salmon fisheries. And as the book talks about, this fishery that got quite hammered in the past is now recovering. There's now more concerted effort within the European Union and between countries to figure out this problem. So there's a few attributes about lobster in Maine. Maine is someplace that I've been going my whole life, so I sort of know about it personally. But there's some interesting stories about how they manage the common property issues there. But they only allow, this both for crab and for lobsters, they only allow you to harvest mature individuals that have gotten to mating size. So you measure, there's an actual measuring stick that's like how big the lobster or the crab is. So you can only harvest ones that are up to full size. And then there's been an interesting thing where the local people have figured out how to not harvest the females that are laying eggs. And it's an interesting story where they figured out when you catch the lobster, if it has eggs on it, you take your knife and you cut a little notch in the tail and throw it back in. So they're throwing a lot of lobsters back in, all the lobsters that are too small back in. And then they find a laying female eggs, they throw that back in. But then if you catch another time this lobster that has a notch in its tail, you know that it's a female that's been reproducing. And so even if it's a sellable lobster, then they throw them back in. And this is that thing where there's, a common property resource where usually, on the margin, I'm just going to sell it. But if everyone's going to the same dock and everyone knows each other, these sort of cultural management habits can get in place where you stop landing the laying females. You get to the dock, you still have to sell it to a guy, he's buying the lobsters from everybody else, he's going to see the notch on the tail, you have some sort of social relations there. So lobsters are harvested by small groups of guys in small villages. They can manage this thing about the laying lobsters, but they can also manage who's got their traps in their inshore fisheries. If you try and tread on their common property resource, they'll cut the lines for your trap, or they'll run you out. They're sort of like a gang defending their turf kind of thing. So where there are social relations and people living together, small areas for a longer time, there's a whole bunch of anthropological examples where common property can be managed well. Ooh, here's the picture of the notch. So here's a lobster, a female lobster full of eggs, and somebody has cut a little notch in the tail. So they'll throw that lobster back in, and then later when they catch it, they'll see the notch on the trail and know to keep it out there. So they can have some lobsters laying eggs constantly. They're catching all the other lobsters, but not the ones that are still laying eggs. Just an interesting thing where there's a lot of biology. This totally fits into a population biology model, but the fishermen have come up with this by themselves. So there's a big issue in fisheries on the demand side. We only eat certain types of fish. We only demand certain types of fish, right? We only really get that into and pay high prices for a few species. Traditionally, Japanese sushi had a whole bunch of other species to it, but when it got made into a commercialized thing that you buy at the supermarket, it's mostly salmon, tuna, or weird things called crab, which is a bunch of whitefish that could have been eaten as sushi unto itself, but we make it into sticks and call it crab. We don't eat, so here in the Bay Area, there's squid. There's a lot of squid. There's a huge fishery out there of squid. Only a tiny little bit of them are caught. If we like squid, there would be a whole sustainable fishery of squid right out there outside the bay. But we don't really eat it. People don't really eat it that much. There's a whole bunch of smaller fish and whiter fish that don't have names, and we don't eat those enough. We don't eat those in proportion to their ability to repopulate and grow in the ocean. We just love these few species that we know about. So there's a lot of demand issues. Where do you eat on the food web? There's a whole bunch of different species, and we're like, I'll have the salmon, and the tuna. But there's the rock, what's the one that's the other big one? Red snapper, which is, they went and looked at red snapper in a whole bunch of different supermarkets, and they found that there were 10 or 15 different species of fish that were getting sold as red snapper. So that's just that weird thing where it becomes a name that you're familiar with, so you'll order it, but it could be many, many kinds of fish. Red snapper is like a brown fish down here. But in sustainability terms, we just maybe need to broaden our palate and eat different kinds of fish with different kinds of population cycles and different growth curves and different abilities to repopulate and different ecosystems that they live in. If we just have these few species that we eat, we're headed towards crashing those populations. So here I'm going to go a little bit into this question of the transferable quotas. They started and they were able to sort of stick them successfully in New Zealand. They had some smaller fisheries. Again, smaller fisheries, people more living in smaller scale, closer to villages. In Europe, you have these bigger fisheries and bigger boats and big money involved, so it got very difficult to introduce these in Europe and the US, but they've been successfully introduced in New Zealand. And we have this issue where they have, sort of as a beginning step, to reduce the number of boats and to reduce the number of jobs. That's part of it. There's too much boats, there's too much capital invested in a fishery. We actually need to buy people out of the fishery. We need less people expecting to find their jobs there. And we had this issue that whoever owns the quota is going to be getting some monopoly profits, and we do that well enough that it seems fair. So I'm going to show you a little graph from a review article that talks about a whole bunch of different fisheries. So here's a whole bunch of different fisheries in the United States, and they're all inshore fisheries. Here we have whiting, groundfish, halibut, rockfish, pollock, scallops, shellfish, a whole bunch of different types of fishing, long line trawling, hook and line, and many of them are just single species fisheries. So they looked at a whole bunch of different cases where these transferable quotas have been introduced, and they show sort of the problem. So this is the amount of fish that are getting caught. It's relatively level. And this is the number of boats that are going out to fish them. So this is, sort of post-war. The amount of boats and capital is going way up, but they're just landing the same amount of fish. So this is, they're getting to dissolve the profits. Net benefits are equal to zero. There's too much cost going in and just the same amount of fish coming out. So this is looking, at times where they introduce transferable quotas. Total allowable catch, it's called. Another term for the quotas. They said how much fish can be landed. They were able to stabilize how much fish got caught instead of moving up and down, and the stock of the biomass was able to recover. In this fishery, it's moving around a little bit, but they slowly hammered it down. So maybe they started at a higher level and slowly dropped down the allowable catch, and the biomass was still crashing, but they got to the sustainable level they need to get to, and the amount of fish are recovering. So the regulator can introduce something at one level and then move the level of quota down over time once people are participating in it. And people can see fishers can see their profits going up, so they can start to reduce the quota even more once they know that they're guaranteed to get some profits. So how the regulator phases in the allowable catch quotas can be a part of the trick of doing the policy well. And basically, a whole bunch of different factors are going to be affected by this. So this is just trying to motivate. Without catch shares, without the tradable quotas, there's too much capital chasing too few fish, and there's this point of like a fishing derby. Too many people are chasing too few fish. Just really quickly, they had discards. There's a whole bunch of other kinds of fish that get caught. Too many fish were getting discarded. The yields per boat were going down. It was more dangerous. More boats fishing more faster, trying to catch that fish faster. More bad things were happening. Accidents were happening. The number of days that they could actually fish was going down. The amount of fish that they wanted to get was still getting exceeded. And then the amount of fish each boat was able to catch was going down. The amount of revenue per boat is going down, and the number of people working the fisheries bouncing around. But here in the green is this thing where after they put catch shares in place, so there's less boats. This is the first one. Less boats, really important. But the amount of other things that they're catching, they're hammering other resources, that came down. The yields per boat goes up. So each boat out there is catching more. Safety went up. It's a lot safer. The number of days they can fish has gone up. See, this is where they're racing to catch a few fish in a few days. Here they're able to catch. They know that they're going to be able to sell their fish, so they can go out there for longer. They got closer to the biological target. And the revenues for each boat increased. So we had less boats, but more revenue per boat. And we had more stability. So in the fishing derby case, there's a lot of work here and there for a few different days. But here we have a longer season. So you say we have fewer jobs, but they're spread out over a longer time. More revenue per boat. So it's hopefully less jobs, but better jobs that are more reliable jobs. So rationalizing fisheries. There's a lot of other things we have in renewable resources. One that we're completely and totally failing at is the trade in ivory. And this is a long time problem. But the growth in incomes in Asia has only led to an increase in the demand for ivory. So we have hundreds of thousands of elephants that are sort of common property resources in Africa. They're roaming free, and people are going out there and shooting them to cut off their tusks to sell the tusks to people in other countries. This one that's really tough is the people who are making this money managing the resource are continents away from the people who are consuming it. So the people in Africa aren't consuming ivory. Yeah, definitely. I mean, so flooding is hard because flooding is not going to last forever. Say you have a big stockpile and you're like, I'm going to drive the price down and the poachers aren't going to get any money. You could do that, but eventually your stock would get used up, right? But we have the trade in endangered species, CITES, trade in species. So it's illegal to trade in ivory, right? Countries have signed on, you can't trade in ivory. And here's this big pile of ivory, and they put gasoline on, they're going to burn it to show that we're not going to trade in ivory. We're going to do away with ivory trade. What's burning a pile of it going to do to the price of ivory? It's the opposite of what you said, right? The price of ivory is just going to go up as the smoke goes up. And the next person going to poach the next. Right. Yeah, right. The next piece of ivory that you hunt will just be worth that much more. So the price of ivory is going up with this. And then, I think more, this is, just to go back to the fisheries thing, how do you manage it like a monopolist? How do you get that rent where you're going to sell the ivory into the market at some way that's just going to get a maximum amount? What if we took all the ivory, we had little quotas for countries if you wanted to distribute it between countries, and sell it to the maximum amount, and make some of that resource go towards, elephant conservation or stopping poachers? That's the thing is they don't even have the resources to battle the poachers or sort of track the elephant herds or know how many elephants are there and how many are getting killed. Like all these vital parts of the economic model or the biological model are missing. So could you sell the ivory like a monopolist and use, make sure that somebody gets some money, but, make sure that a whole bunch of money goes towards sort of handling it as like a conserved resource? One thing that's weird about it, so one place that could, this could get to, so the idea is don't run it like make it illegal, make it a cartel, like diamonds, like gold. I mean, basically ivory could be selling in the same market as diamonds or gold or pearls or something, right? So right now, for a while, there's been a global ban. It's very difficult to change from the system you're in towards, a system that's selling, but, how could you get to this monopolist way to run things? One thing that's weird is then you have people ranch, then you're just like further down the road, say, let's grow it like we're growing beef. We're just growing ivory like a very valuable thing that we grow on a farm. Yeah, I don't know. There's a whole bunch more to elephants than ivory producers, right? We have this sort of there's a natural wild ecosystem that's out there, and that's just kind of amazing. And we're glad that, there's a whole bunch of reasons why we like to have wild animals be wild animals. That's not just because they're generating a rare resource for us. So it's not like we could just have ranches that grew ivory tusks. Anyways, I should finish up. Time's running out, but we could think about a whole bunch of different environmental resources as renewable resources. Clean air, clean water. There's a stock of clean air. We're going to use it up with pollution, but it has some capacity to regenerate. We're going to make our lakes have acid rain by putting sulfur dioxide in them, but there's some capacity of those lakes to regenerate. How can we get back to what's a sustainable level of allowing our natural resources to regenerate? How can we measure the capacity? Lake Erie being full of dead zones because we put too much phosphates in it, it was able to recover once. It was able to regenerate and absorb a certain amount of pollution. There's a dead zone off of Louisiana, in the Gulf of Mexico. We're way above its capacity to handle the amount of pollution we put in it, but can we get back to closer to some level that it can regenerate? Okay, I will escape before the bell.